Welcome to Smartkarma Compounding Curiosity. It's the same compounding curiosity you and I have always loved, but with the benefit of collaborating with Smartkarma, the independent investment research network that unites insight providers, investors, and investor relations professionals. So, this collaboration between the Asian-first financial research platform Smartkarma and Compounding Curiosity was created to surface the high-quality expertise and analytical strength of the Smartkarma Independent Investment Network and leverage that into the popular podcast format we all know and love. So, I've previously interviewed Raghav here on the podcast, episode 46, in case you're wondering, and I really enjoyed not only his story and ideas, but also his vision for what Smartkarma can be. So, to now be partners and collaborating on this, pinch me, I think I'm dreaming. And be sure to check out Smartkarma at smartkarma.com, where it's free to get started. But let's get stuck into today's episode. Yeah, Simon, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate you just giving your time and your insights. But maybe just to start off, do you just want to give a bit about your background, both in Southeast Asia and how you and your co-founder started Cube Asia?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm originally from Denmark, but I've spent it's coming up to 12 years in Southeast Asia. My first port of call here was Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where I worked for like a venture builder. And then I've just had I've been really fortunate to kind of go around the region and do different things. I started with a startup in the beauty e-commerce industry. We then sold that to Sephora. So suddenly I ended up being in a big beauty retailer. I stayed there for close to, I think, about 7 years and had a wonderful career there across Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand. And then, I moved back to Malaysia a couple of years ago during COVID and decided to start Cube. And Cube is really a market data and insights company focused completely on e-commerce in Southeast Asia. We are two co-founders. We met each other in consulting. So for a brief stint before starting Cube, I was working as an advisor of McKinsey. And that's where I met my co-founder, Sarah. He'd been there for like 10 plus years and was leading e-commerce work in the region. And he and I, we really bonded over what became a shared frustration just for the lack of good market data and insights in this space. And that's why we decided to start the company. So that's about a year ago now.
And given this sort of that lack of data for what you guys are trying to do, how do you get around that? How have you originally started and how has that changed now? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we knew we were passionate about the space due to this shared frustration. But when we started the business, we also knew there were kind of two important questions to square out. The first being, are we the only ones that are frustrated about this, or is there a market for it? And then the second, this is an important one, can we actually do better, right? Because there could also be some structural reasons why even these big established data providers were not really able to meet the bar that we had. Luckily, we've been able to answer both of those questions positively. So we've definitely seen a market for it. And then on the just how to get to better quality, we started the company with the belief that we would be able to get to better accuracy and better granularity if we were able to integrate different disparate data sources. So many data providers out there, or insights providers, they typically rely on kind of one main data source. So that could be web scraping or consumer surveys or access to a big database of consumer receipts, online receipts, things like that. What we have managed to do is combine those. So from a starting point, that means our expense to just build our data set has probably been a bit higher than most providers out there. And that was a bet for us. But we have also seen that as we have been able to integrate those data sources, that leads just quantifiably to better accuracy and better granularity as well. So that there is no real secret sauce beyond the fact that we have gotten really good at combining different data sources. So we have 3 main data sources: scraping, consumer surveys, and e-receipts. And then we supplement that with like a pretty long list of secondary or ancillary data sources. So anything from government reports picked up by our country analysts to sort of broad e-commerce statistics that are out there, anything that's released by companies in their quarterly or annual earnings, all kinds of different things. So we try and build a machine to integrate it all, and test for accuracy, and then just serve the most discerning customers out there.
Yeah, perfect. And bear with me because I'm a complete data noob, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, when you're looking for data sets, and also given you have to integrate them in, like what makes a good data set and what does good data do? Like, yeah, what are some features of a good, useful data set, I guess?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So I think there is this well-known saying, right? Rubbish in, rubbish out. And I think one first rule is just we need to be able to ascertain that what we take in is of high quality and is also complete. And we do many different things, but if we take one of our sort of one of the core services that we provide for our subscribers and customers, it's about sizing different categories online. So that could be like the fashion or beauty category, or it could be a small sliver of it, like skin cleansing in Vietnam on these 3 e-commerce platforms. And there, just completeness of data intake is very important, because oftentimes you don't really know where the end of that rope you're pulling is. You can kind of keep looking, and if you're attempting to get to completeness, where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? And so in a sense, I wouldn't say, like, beyond just the basic hygiene factors of trusting the data we take in and making sure there are no errors in it. Actually, it's also much more for us about understanding almost the input data sources as a patchwork that overlaps but has some gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that in order to get to, for example, a good estimate of the size of a category, maybe one data source is great for understanding which competitors are so and so big, or which products have started selling well the last month. But we need another data source for understanding just how big is the category. Or understanding how many consumers are participating in it, or what's their frequency of purchase or whatever. So in a sense, no data set is perfect. And we try and then find different input data sources to sort of make sure that we get to as complete of a picture as possible.
Yeah, perfect. No, I appreciate explaining that. Get me up to speed quickly. Because yeah, going deep in the weeds about social commerce in Southeast Asia, would you just be able to give us a quick snapshot of sort of where we're at, where we've come from, and yeah, and then we'll build up on that, I guess, because there's lots to work with there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we believe social commerce is a part of e-commerce. So we started looking at social commerce at the beginning of 2022. And that was really because we were seeing an interesting dynamic where you had kind of e-commerce platforms like Shopee, Lazada, and Tokopedia on one hand. And then you had social and content platforms like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram on the other. And they were living in this interesting symbiosis where, let's say, Instagram was making a lot of money sending traffic through ads to the e-commerce players. And then the e-commerce players were able to convert that to revenue by selling people stuff. But we also saw that these two groups were, in a sense, starting to encroach a bit on each other's territory. The e-commerce players were launching some social features like live streaming or entertainment features like small in-app games to try and have consumers go straight into the e-commerce app, not having to buy that ad. On the other hand, we saw some of the social and content apps start to integrate some e-commerce features like catalogs or business messaging or even payment. And we saw that consumers in Southeast Asia were really enjoying interacting with these sort of overlapping experiences. And that's where we thought, hey, what's going on here? There seems to be a sort of a merger of these two sets of experiences, and consumers are really enjoying it. So as we've sized it just on the numbers, we believe social commerce, which is really e-commerce with some distinct social traits, it's about a quarter of the e-commerce market in Southeast Asia. And it's growing faster than overall e-commerce, especially with the recent rise of TikTok Shop. And in a sense, TikTok Shop is the most blue flame clean manifestation of social commerce that we have seen so far, because it is a content destination. It is a commerce destination. It has a full integrated e-commerce checkout flow. You don't need to go anywhere else. You can do everything you need in one place, and consumers are really, really loving that. So that's kind of where we are at.
Yeah. Because I remember even reading the social commerce in Southeast Asia report. You listed the 5 winning tips of brands, and number 2 was already that TikTok Shop has begun to show its promise across Southeast Asia. So is it just what makes them so much stronger compared to competitors? Can we just better dive deeper on those things you just listed? And
in a way, it's nothing. It's not very complex. It's just really well executed. So they have a couple of there are a few different types of social commerce. We see 4 archetypes in Southeast Asia. So conversational commerce, which is everything about text message based interaction between sellers and buyers. Then we have live selling, which is like selling through live streams. Then we have community group buying, which is a bit more for rural communities, which is like reseller and agent based modes of buying online. And then finally, we have what we call social platform commerce, which is just e-commerce experiences where you have a full checkout inside of a social app. Like you never need to go to a separate place to check out. And TikTok does live shopping and social platform commerce better than any other app that we have seen. So just something as simple as integrating a proper checkout feature. I mean, I have been looking for Facebook and Instagram to do this for years. They just never moved on it. We saw prior to the rise of TikTok Shop, we saw, for example, individual live sellers in a country like Thailand on Facebook who were able to do in like a 1 4-hour live streaming session, able to do like 150 to 200,000 orders, where all of those e-commerce orders were received through Facebook Messenger and Facebook comments. I mean, just completely crazy to organize and manage, right? And they were managing to do this with some custom sort of hacked together software, these sellers, but it was almost as if Facebook or Instagram or whatever, anything in the Meta ecosystem, were either passive or almost a little bit against this behavior. And then TikTok just came around, was like, okay, you can live stream here and we will have a fully integrated catalog. It will be easy to check out. We will even integrate to third-party logistics providers so we can manage a good logistics and returns experience. So they just, in a sense, TikTok just did the more or less obvious thing of enabling what people here really wanted to do all along.
I saw you mentioned, maybe it was another podcast or something I've read, that you noted most live sellers on TikTok Shop are micro sellers offering high discounts on mass market products, whereas big brands, especially global ones, have been a bit slower in adopting the platform. So like, why is there this sluggishness in big brands, given they're already familiar with TikTok though?
Yeah, so this was true when we read it in this when we wrote that in December last year. And we still see that on TikTok Shop, depending a bit on the category and the market, maybe 50 to 70% of the sales come from either resellers or sort of individual influencers or KOLs who are selling. So I would really, in most cases, I would say these are still micro in scale. But what we are seeing is 2 things. The first is a lot of these global brands are launching on TikTok Shop as quickly as they can. It's a very daunting and difficult channel for these kinds of companies to run because, you know, they're corporate companies. They like working with agencies. They have complex sort of guidelines for everything. And then TikTok Shop is like, if you're in Indonesia, for example, it's like you need to live stream 12 hours per day. You need to produce 3-4 videos per day. You need to have 5,000 affiliates that you don't know who they are, right? Like that's like, how do you even do that? So the commercial opportunity is big enough that most of these brands are considering it. A few of them have already moved. So that's like one change. The other is that we have now seen the emergence of a new class of kind of insurgent champions on TikTok Shop. So these are typically local brands that are not that well known outside of e-commerce, who are just mastering the commercial model of TikTok Shop. And so the two biggest categories in TikTok Shop are fashion and beauty. The beauty category is where there are the biggest individual sellers, or the biggest brand sellers, just because the fashion category is more scattered. And in beauty, I mean, to take an example, like, yeah, Indonesia, which is the biggest market for TikTok Shop at the moment in Southeast Asia, the biggest beauty brands on that channel will cross 30-40 million US dollars in sales this year. So it's significant scale already. Like, definitely we can't call them micro anymore, but they are also at the same time brands that if I put 10 of those logos on a slide in front of you, you probably wouldn't recognize a single one. So it is evolving fast, and I imagine that over time the percentage of international and local champion brands as a percentage of total sales will increase. That's what we've seen with all the other e-commerce channels here. Is it starts with the small sellers, and then over time, unfortunately, they kind of get weeded out, and the brands take over instead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember hearing on the other podcast, you might have mentioned, they've made it when they're selling Samsung TVs and white goods or something.
Yeah, that's right. TikTok is doing wonderful in fashion and beauty, starting to do well in FMCG. So like mom and baby categories, things like instant formula, whatnot. But yeah, nobody's really buying, white goods and electronics. So there's still some categories where Shopee, Lazada, Tokopedia, and so on, they really have the lion's share of the market.
It's fair enough. Everyone always talks about dominate your niche and then expand out, so I can't complain there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Given all the positives around TikTok Shop, if we go the flip side, is there anything that can go wrong in executing their strategy, do you think, then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first, let's give credit where credit is due. They have come out of the blue and are on a path to really doing very well in 2023. So just as a data point, we believe that their net sales for the year in the region would probably be around like $13-16 billion. Just for the e-commerce geeks out there, that's not GMV. There is a fairly high returns and cancellation percentage. So we have to subtract a bit for that. So I want to look at real trade volume, like how much money are consumers actually spending. So it will be substantial in size. What can go wrong? A lot of things. To take some of the key risk vectors that we can see right now, the first is that TikTok benefits a lot from being both an e-commerce and content platform. But at the same time, that also means that they have to obey regulation, both as an e-commerce player and a content player in all of these different markets. And they don't really seem to love being regulated. I mean, I guess nobody does. So you've also already seen some like probes and inquiries in countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, where they're a bit like kind of, you need to establish yourselves properly locally here. And implied in that is perhaps also like we need to be able to perform perhaps a bit of soft censorship and things like that. So that's going to be an interesting one for them to balance, because they have to fight two fronts on that regulatory piece. The second is they haven't really managed to get a foothold for real outside of beauty and fashion. That's fine. It's a big market on its own, but if you want to be a real e-commerce destination and continue to grow, you do need to serve needs outside of that. It also means that they have a pretty sparse appeal for most male consumers at the moment, so they are a bit overweight to women. So we need to see them really establishing a third or a fourth category outside of that before we can really say they have a firm foundation as an e-commerce player for years, right? And then the last thing is they've recently made some really clumsy moves related to what I think is called Project S internally in TikTok, which is about acting as a retailer rather than a marketplace. What that means is currently, whether it's Shopee, Lazada, TikTok Shop, they all marketplaces, meaning there is a seller, there is a buyer, and then there's the platform in the middle, typically taking a small cut. If you go into a retail model, it means that you as a platform are now owning the stock. You're buying it wholesale from partners and you're selling it to consumers. So it's a very different business model. Shopee, Lazada, and so on have generally stayed completely out of this, which means they can really think about their business as that of a platform where they need to serve sellers and buyers alike. TikTok, this early on, have started talking about acting as a retailer, meaning either creating its own like house brands or at least buying goods and selling them to consumers. And this is challenging for two reasons. The first is TikTok should focus on getting all the big international brands on their platform. That is what they need to do to complete their assortment and enter these categories that they're not in. It needs to, like, you're not going to buy electronics that are brandless, right? Like it needs to be, you need to have a great Samsung flagship store, for example. So at a moment where that should be their focus, this means they're almost indicating to the same sellers, we're going to come and try and replace you. Like, I mean, come on. It's something that Shopee and Lazada 10 years into their journey have not even started thinking about. I'm sure they're thinking about it, but they haven't done anything about it. And for TikTok to talk about that this early on, I think is really shooting themselves in the foot. But it also means, from a regulatory standpoint, it means that they can be perceived as taking business away from these micro sellers that, in a sense, the micro seller story is what could make them build a wonderful, productive relationship with governments all over the world, the region, right? So I think that that's quite clumsy. So let's see. It's early days, but those are some of the risk factors. That said, there's more good than bad now. That's for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, and it's pretty much off the cuff, but why do you think they're jumping the gun on this then? Is it just better profit margins they see, or why do you reckon they're going down that route then?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think when we talk about TikTok, we must bear in mind that they have a Chinese sort of cousin or sister app called Douyin, which is a fair few years ahead of TikTok in development and monetization. And TikTok Shop fits very well in the mold of what Douyin did in e-commerce in China. And so I think what is happening a little bit is that, in a sense, they have the future already. There was a question mark on whether Southeast Asia would react similar to the Chinese market, and so whether the same features and the same businesses would work. But it seems that they generally do. So I can imagine that a lot of this is just them being really eager to pull the future into the present, right? Like, oh my God, we've seen that this and that and whatever is working in China. Let's just very quickly apply it here as well. This retailer model is also a easy way to deal with not being able to onboard the right sellers. So if they're having, I don't know if they're having struggles onboarding like big brands in perhaps categories where they're not as big right now, but that could be a way of kind of attempting to cut past that again, like, distort growth a bit more. But in this particular case, I just think it's really it's the wrong time to pursue that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And it's amazing we've gone so far without mentioning or going deep into Shopee. So we'll get deep into C-Limited and Shopee. Yeah. So just with Shopee, how has it been able to sort of grow its GMV meaningfully between Q1 and Q2, whereas Lazada and Tokopedia have been sort of struggling to do so?
Yeah, it's a really, like, so we are at the end of August 2023 now. It's like the most interesting moment in e-commerce in Southeast Asia, for me, at least from the last 3 or 4 years. for the first time, we have a real regional challenger in TikTok. We talked about TikTok, so let's leave that on the side. But for the first time in a while, there's a real new regional player, not just in 1 or 2 markets, it's really everywhere. The second is that it's a really hard time to be an incumbent e-commerce giant in Southeast Asia. And here I'm thinking about Shopee, Lazada, Tokopedia, and so on, because their valuations were so either directly their valuations or the valuations of their parents, who are, for Shopee, it's Sea that also has some gaming assets. For Lazada, it's Alibaba that is a sprawling empire of e-commerce and other things. For Tokopedia, it's this new constellation called Go2, where Tokopedia was merged with the mobility company Gojek. But in all those cases, 2 years ago or so, there was such amazing high promises for the fortunes of these companies. So very high valuations, amazing multiples. Investors were super interested in this story. There was talk about like the super app story of Southeast Asia and all these different things. So that in the last year and a half has all just kind of crashed and burned. Growth has not lived up to expectations. Monetization and revenue has not at all lived up to expectations. The funding markets have obviously slowed a lot, as well as interest rates have come up. So especially in the last year or so, all of these e-commerce players have had to perform a little bit of an almost impossible balancing act, where they keep growing top line, but at the same time also turn profitable and then start to display consistent profits. They have all tried to do this in different ways and with varying degrees of intensity. And Q1, Q2 this year is essentially when the effect of those moves has started to be shown. So we can see that Shopee, for example, turned profitable in Q1. Big moment. The CEO went in a big Bloomberg interview, talked about how hard their cost-cutting journey had been, one-ply toilet paper, and I don't know what. Then went out and offered a big raise to the whole team and was sort of, we are through the war now. Lazada is on its whole thing. Alibaba is breaking up into, I think it's 6 or 7 different companies. Lazada will now find itself in this odd bunch of international e-commerce assets. We don't know if they will IPO or if there will be a sort of private equity offering of whatever it will be. Go2 in Indonesia, its whole own thing. But common for them all is they've put themselves on the spectrum between top line and bottom line focus. And in Q1, Q2, we've seen the effects of that. So if we take Shopee, the most important one, Q1 profitable. I think for us industry observers, it was like, okay, fine. Now what?
Yeah.
Q2, what are you going to show? Are you going to show that you can just scrape by and stay profitable, but at the trade-off of having lower top-line growth, maybe even ceding market share to TikTok Shop in some markets, because TikTok Shop is spending like Shopee did in 2016, 2017, like it's really party times? Or are you going to show top-line growth, but then not deliver profits, which will anger your investors? In my mind, there was never a way to do both. It's a fairly simple business model where you can only control so many levers, or you can only adjust so many levers. And what we saw was very clearly they had decided to return to a focus on top line growth, which I think makes sense for the business in the face of this growing competition from TikTok Shop. That had the very predictable effect of sliding them back into losses for that unit. And combined with some bad news from the gaming side, Garena side of C, it caused what I think it was like nearly 30% decline in the stock price from day 1 to day 2 when they released earnings. So in a sense, it was like, okay, now the market has certainly shown us what it feels about this, but they are not out of this bind. I mean, Shopee, in a sense, has at least taken the pain now and can now I suppose, go on and focus on top line growth. It should be priced into the stock already. But for Tokopedia and for Lazada, I'm sure that these companies are meeting every week right now, trying to figure out how they're going to strike the right balance. So it's a super tough spot.
Yeah. And you know the numbers better than me here, so I'm just sort of off the top of my head. But I think e-commerce still has a long way to go in Southeast Asia, though, doesn't, compared to more developed markets like China and the US.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, we were spoiled between up until, let's say, about a year ago. The 10-year CAGR had been, I mean, very, very high, 30, 40, 50% or something like that. So just amazing growth. That's never coming back. It's gonna be more, perhaps the next 10 years will be something between 14, 17% or something. So still growing much faster than retail is in these markets. It's growing much faster than GDP. But that kind of rocket growth period is over. And it has very big implications for the brands that are selling, because they've been used to treating e-commerce as a new venture and something where top line mattered and where profitability would be sometime in the future. And I mean, what's happening now is like kind of the top line growth party is over. It's much more now about just sustainable operations, reaching profitability. And yes, it's just a very interesting moment in e-commerce. We are very bullish still. I mean, again, if you're in retail, you look for sort of spaces or channels of growth, and e-commerce is absolutely the fastest growing channel there still. But just the total sort of absolute numbers of growth are definitely in percentage are down. In total dollar value are way up because the base is so high now. So yeah. This is a different stage of growth.
Yeah. And we'll ignore TikTok Shop for now, but when we're talking about Shopee, Lazada, and Tokopedia, both from either a user perspective and an investor perspective, how do you view their strength relative to the others? Because I remember in the other podcast, you said that between Shopee and Lazada, if you had a go-to market strategy, it would almost be pretty similar for both of them if you're selling products on the platform. So yeah, could you talk about them?
Yeah. So it between Shopee and Lazada, it used to be that Lazada was the more quality-focused player. And that had an implication on its assortment as well. So it has had some exclusive flagship stores for brands of a slightly higher price level. But what we can see in the last year or so is that in most of the markets, Lazada is now letting in the brands at the bottom that previously sort of belonged to Shopee. So those two channels are looking more and more similar month or quarter by quarter. Shopee has a wonderful advantage in that it has a substantially bigger reach in all of the markets. And it is the leader in all the markets. Depending a bit country to country, we would normally see Lazada's consumer base. Almost all of Lazada's customers also shop on Shopee, but perhaps a good maybe half, somewhere to between 1/3 and a half of the Shopee customers do not shop on Lazada. So there is a bigger reach. And the second sort of unique trait of Shopee is that just Shopee is perceived as the primary e-commerce destination for more consumers. So it means it is an app that is just opened more frequently. So I think they are still firmly in the lead, and it is almost their game to lose. And in that sense, I agree completely with their decision to refocus on top line growth, because that will contribute to that ability to differentiate. They just have a bigger business, bigger reach. You mentioned Tokopedia as well. Tokopedia is having a very hard time. One, they're only exposed to Indonesia, and Indonesia's e-commerce market is growing slower than e-commerce in the other Southeast Asian countries, at least most of them. It also just clearly doesn't really offer them a lot of sort of portfolio in terms of where they want to make bets. And then they are, for better or worse, I mean, it's a harsh way to say it, but they're sort of trapped in this go-to stock or listed company, which contains an e-commerce asset, Tokopedia, and a mobility asset, Gojek, both of which are currently still unprofitable. And so at a group level, they need to get to profitability, and they are taking a harsh, strict diet to get there. And unfortunately, by having to make so many cuts, we can see that Tokopedia's reach is actually falling, and their sales are falling as well. So I think out of the bunch, they are honestly the ones that are having the toughest time, and I don't envy the hand that they have been dealt between Lazada and Shopee. My bet for now would really be Shopee, but I wish for Lazada to have a bright future, because for consumers and for brands, which frankly I care more about them than I care about the platforms will be okay. For consumers and for sellers, it's gonna be much better for everyone if there is a little bit of competition.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it's funny with Gojek too. I loved using Gojek every time in Bali and in Jakarta.
Yeah,
investing, no way.
Yeah. It's a bit similar to the story of Grab, I suppose. Yeah, great for consumers, but yeah, not so great for investors so far.
Yeah. And we spoke a bit before we started recording. You wanted to rephrase it. So I'll ask the question as is, and then you can just maybe talk a bit more. But yeah, I sort of was wondering why Shopee's position in Indonesia, historically one of its sort of key growth markets, has sort of deteriorated since September last year. Could you talk a bit about that and how you would describe it, I guess?
Yeah. No, so I think it's absolutely true that they've had a hard time. Everyone else than TikTok Shop have had a hard time in Indonesia e-commerce since, last summer, just to varying degrees. So what's happened is growth has slowed a bit. And our forecast for e-commerce growth in Indonesia this year is 12, 13, 14% or something like that, which is perhaps 5 points lower than most of the other Southeast Asian markets. So it's just a little bit slower. It's also where there was the most intense promo and price competition in e-commerce in the past. And that contributed to just bigger total adoption of e-commerce as well, because a lot of new consumers came online using those promos, incentives, and whatnot, all funded by the platforms. And as Shopee and even Lazada and Tokopedia have pulled back on their incentives, and TikTok, funny enough, has come into the mix at just the same time, the effect has been that these incumbent players, Shopee, Lazada, and Tokopedia, they've just had a very hard time. Interestingly, so Tokopedia, definitely quite poor performance. But this is a deliberate choice on their part of just really paring back investment. Between Shopee and Lazada, interestingly, Lazada actually has benefited a little bit from Shopee stepping down a bit, and that's just because a lot of the customers are the same, a lot of the assortment is the same, but Shopee used to be more aggressive in promos. So in a sense, just by virtue of Shopee kind of pulling back, it made Lazada comparatively more attractive. So Lazada had a little bit of a sort of a bright moment there. But that's then kind of over now as Shopee is returning to investing in top line. So yeah, so I think Shopee's Q3, Q4 last year was, and Q1 muted. I expect that we will see them returning pretty aggressively to growth now, and in a sense trying to win the market. I think that would be a compelling news story.
Perfect. Yeah, before we wrap up today, is there anything we haven't talked about that's sort of consequential about the future of Shopee or e-commerce in Southeast Asia? Yeah, anything we've missed or you want to add?
I think so. I've spent the last 10 years in e-commerce in Southeast Asia, and I think and this is, I know there's a lot of investors who listen to this podcast. I think it's helpful sometimes to zoom out, step back a little bit, and think about the long-term prospects of e-commerce in the region. There is a quantitative element to that. What percentage will e-commerce end up being of total retail? Data points like that. What's the CAGR forward? We've talked a little bit about those. But I think it's also very interesting to think about the qualitative aspect of it. What will e-commerce end up looking like? And I think it's important there to say e-commerce is still very nascent from an experience perspective. It's all pretty much the same feel. Shopee kind of feels the same as Lazada, feels the same as Tokopedia. A very high share of the market is concentrated on these platforms. We haven't really seen the emergence of great brand.com, so brand websites or brand experiences selling directly to consumer. We haven't seen great growth in single category focused players like your Sephora's or Zalora's and whatnot, who are focused on one category and doing something special there. We haven't seen some very high touch, almost top of the market luxury, what that will end up looking like. So I think we are at an interesting stage now where TikTok is in a way showing that there is now something else than just the flat e-commerce experience of Shopee, Lazada, and Tokopedia. But as an investor, I would be very curious to look for signs of what new modes of e-commerce consumers are going to be picking up, because there's no doubt that it will become more rich, it will become more diverse as the market matures, similar to what we can see in the US or in Europe or indeed even in China. And so as an observer of the industry, that's something I really try and keep my eyes peeled for. And if I was an investor, that's also where I would be sort of attempting to try and see into the future.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that answer. Simon, thank you so much for today. Where can people find you? Anything else you'd like to add, or links you'd like to mention? I really recommend the social commerce report you guys wrote last year, but anything else?
Thank you. Yeah, so we will be coming out with a couple new reports actually in the coming months. The place to find me is LinkedIn. So just Simon Torring. I'm kind of a LinkedIn addict. So we are now a pretty big community there actually. And I try and just pass along anything I find either from our own data sets or from the broader e-commerce industry 2-3 times a week. So people could find me there anytime.
Beautiful. Yeah, people love to dunk on LinkedIn, but I found some pretty good stuff through it. So
I love LinkedIn.
Very handy. So Simon, thank you so much. I really appreciate it today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast episode, be sure to check out all the other amazing content on the Smartkarma and Compounding Curiosity channels. Links will be in the description below, where you'll be able to find the transcript, mention links, show notes, and any other related resources. Also, be sure to check out Smartkarma at smartkarma.com, where it's free to get started. So, hope you've enjoyed today's episode, but until next time, have a good one.